All right. We are in element one, building your confidence. And this is about knowing yourself. We're in chapter four, access self compassion. The problem with high expectations. Lead us into this, Scott.
Yes. And I might say concerning building self-confidence, I apologize if I'm washed out. We've got all kinds of snow on the ground, and I have no blinds to pull down. So if you can't see this half of my face, it's building my
Yeah.
self-confidence. Um,
And we have,
compassion.
yeah. Yeah.
So he starts this chapter out with this story about him buying a new bike, and he wasn't sure what color bike to get, and goes on about asking for different opinions, being afraid of making the wrong decision. He blames his parents for how they raised him.
I thought it was a funny story.
It is. It is a funny story. And actually, after he made a decision, he woke up the next morning and second guessed himself. And he jokingly but seriously concluded, I guess I need to keep building my self-compassion. And he said something in here in this particular chapter 4 on self-compassion that really caught my attention. He said, I need to be aware if my expectations of everyone are counterproductively high.
Mm-hmm.
Are my expectations, and that's a good question, are my expectations of everyone too high? And it may be they're too high because my expectations of myself are unrealistically too high.
Yeah.
And so he encourages us to build this self-compassion, as he calls it, and be aware if we're taking our expectations of others too high, making us critical of them. But again, coming from a heart where we're always critical of each other. And he ultimately, in this chapter, comes to the conclusion, I'm not perfect, but it's the best I can do. And that may sound like something we read on a bumper sticker almost, but it's so valuable, right? Many of us are just unrealistically hard on ourselves.
Yes. And I think I want to share this real quick. I feel like I've seen it in two ways. I think there are the type of high achievers that really push themselves because they do think their worth is tied up in what they achieve. And that's looking for, you might call those the perfectionists. They get so hard on themselves if something is just not completely perfect, which is usually unattainable. There's also, I think, on the other side, those who have high expectations on themselves, and they constantly live in this really low place, meaning they usually get depressed about them, not clinically, but they get frustrated at themselves so much because they think that they should just be perfect, meaning I should be cured. I shouldn't have to keep struggling with this over and over. And the high expectation of themselves is keeping them from what they are actually wanting to achieve because they're so hard on themselves. And that leads into the next chapter, actually, because it says, regression, meaning just wanting to make things go away, especially when it comes to ourself. It'll only lead us, I'm just trying to read it. It just leads us to push those things into the shadow, projecting them onto other people, at which point we will be controlled by and even become the very things we hate. That leads into the embracing your shadow in chapter 5.
Yeah, and so he is effectively encouraging us that when we are judgmental of other people and we conclude, I would never be like you, or I would never do what you've done.
Yeah.
He throws out a wise caution that who's to say what choices that maybe if we were raised in different circumstances or in different circumstances currently, who's to say what choices we might make? And he says, I'm not here to excuse anything necessarily that's wrong, but we shouldn't emphatically separate ourselves from another human being. Recognize, I like to say there's always 360 degrees to somebody's circumstance, and usually we don't know what it is. Many times we don't know everybody's story. Heck, let's be honest, we don't know 360 degrees of our own story half the time, right? Like, I mean, we know our history, but what makes us tick, we're not always fully aware of that. And so he encourages us under this idea of embracing our shadow to be aware that there is that bent within us, which reminds me a lot of, as Christ followers, what we would point to like a Romans 3:23, right? Everyone has what the Bible calls sin in their life, or Romans 7. That there is that part of us, and obviously that's what Christ died for. Yeah. So in identifying that part of us is certainly, we would in Celebrate Recovery, we just did this, in fact, last week. We would talk about coming out of denial and identifying that, oh yeah, that is there within me.
I think, I've heard it said many times, the way you judge others is a reflection often of yourself, even though you don't realize it. It can often be the things that you don't like in yourself that you've tried to bury. And so it's interesting. There's actually a quote that's, I think it was by, anyway, but he says, judging others is not a reflection of them. It's a reflection of the person doing the judging. And it's just interesting to note that that's often what we try and do, is because there's two types of way that we can grow. I've heard this said, you want to be the tallest building, right? The way you can grow is you just keep really working on yourself. You work on your foundation. You work on, you work on the bars, the reinforcement and things, or you can go around and try and crash everybody else's, and unfortunately the second one, you do find that in the end you're trying to bring everything down, and it's not really raising you up. So, but embracing your shadow, I think it's an important lesson to learn, and that and admittedly, we don't want to be in denial. I mean, we just had that lesson, right? And we don't want to be in regression. You cannot just sweep things under the rug. You cannot just try and forget it. You cannot just compartmentalize it, because it'll grow, and it'll sit there waiting for the opportune moment when you're either tired or when you're frustrated, and it'll just come rushing out,
Absolutely. I like the way he ends this chapter. He says, what secrets do we hide about ourselves? And we talk about that a lot in Celebrate Recovery. We're only as sick as our secrets. And he says, embracing them, the secrets, helps us identify who we really are and build confidence.
So chapter 6, we're going to finish this off, because this is, I think, a good reminder constantly. It's not all about achievement. Stop worrying about how much you matter. Now, you thought that was an interesting chapter too. What'd you think?
I did. I really did. In fact, I've listened to it twice now, and I'm still processing it, because he uses the phrase embracing our irrelevancy. And in the context, I'm not taking him to mean that we don't matter, but he says, I think it's more a message of who we are versus embracing who we are versus what we do. And so he gives specifics. Again, he's very practical in this book. That's why I would pick it up and read it. He talks about going to a park and just sitting there with no agenda. Start with a minute, go to 5 minutes, like just sit there and be, and
Right.
be aware. He even gives a specific task like resist the temptation to check email all day, with the idea being that can make us feel like we are really important because we're getting emails or responding to them.
Yeah.
So it
Feel
gives a
like you
number
are
of these.
needed. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, he does say one of the silver lining to feeling that, or this kind of irrelevancy, is freedom. So once again, I feel like this totally goes, especially today when you have social media influencers. It's
Mm,
basically saying, if you're not an influencer, you can actually have freedom. You can be in a position where you can go to a park and it not matter that you're just sitting and enjoying the present moment.
absolutely. He talks about enjoying the interaction of a person, like a conversation with a person, just for the pleasure of it. Or
Hmm.
do I feel compelled, which I often do? Do I feel compelled that I have to help them in some way, or can I just sit there and listen and be with them
Yeah.
without the compulsion to help someone?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. And that goes a long way with just continuing to know yourself. In this moment, should I actually try and help, or should I just be here with them? In
Hmm.
this moment, does somebody need to hear my idea, or can I let someone share, someone else take the floor and possibly share the same idea?
Yep.
You're leaving
And
room
it,
for others, and I think you're leaving room for yourself.
yep, it does remind me of Philippians 2. Consider others to be more
Mm,
important than yourself, following the example of Christ. And
yeah.
that was his example to us, and that's what we're trying to live out.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a great connection there to a biblical principle. And he ends this chapter by saying, even when you feel irrelevant to others, you can still
Yeah.
feel relevant to yourself. I would maybe expand that to say, even when I'm not helping others, I can be aware that I'm still loved by God. I'm one of his children. I feel relevant to him. And certainly that builds my
Hmm.
confidence.
Right. Right. So this is knowing yourself. This is just part one of building confidence, and we've gone through a lot of this kind of things in books in the past too. But I do like this book. It's very practical, like Scott said. It's got some short things to take a look at, and I just think it's really simple to be reminded of it over and over. So
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for joining us for this session, and we'll pick it up next time. Take care.